Jason got the audience. Hi, everybody. Woo! How's everybody doing? Excellent, excellent. Well, my name is Isabel Porras. I lead learning and development here at Out and Equal. I'm very excited to have all of you today join us, and also all of you that are joining virtually. I will say selfishly, I have been really very much looking forward to this panel, and I'm going to take a seat, if you don't mind, before I introduce our panelists. I don't know about you all, but especially as practitioners, these last couple of years have been a little tough. And so, especially with all of our workshops, we're really looking at best practices in terms of our workplaces, but with this session, and I got to do that, right, because I'm on staff, I wanted us to be able to have a conversation that's not about what our companies are doing, but really how are we doing? And the folks that we have on the panel today are really global leaders in this space who've been working here quite some time and who've been dealing firsthand with a lot of the issues that we're talking about. So very excited for our conversation to really get to know how we can better sustain ourselves as DEI leaders. And so with that, please join me in welcoming our panel. First of all, we have our board member, our newest board member, very excited about Teresita Richard from Capital One, Global Head of Diversity, Inclusion, and Belonging. You may have seen her on the main stage in a little conversation. Then we are joined by Bo Young Lee, who is Chief Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Officer at Uber. Hi, Bo. Shout out. All right. My dear friend Patty Nishimura Dingle, who is the Global Head of D&I at Riot Games. Woo! And last but not least, Rowdy Perez, Senior Director of Diversity External Partnerships at Experian. Woo! All right, so welcome everybody. So I'm looking at the clock. This is an hour session. They've all been an hour, and I promise I'm going to do my best to keep it to like 35 or 40 minutes. You can start cutting me off. So I want to make sure that we have some time for questions from all of you in the room, as well as our virtual attendees that will be joining. So with that, I want to start with our first question. I mean, the panel title refers to reckoning, which has been a word we've been talking a lot about, right, during our national inflection points in the last few years. And I think one of the most notable inflection points was really the murder of George Floyd and the subsequent social movements in response to racial inequity, police violence, continued discrimination. So the workplace certainly didn't escape these topics, and corporate America responded with bold statements, actions, all that good stuff, including increased hiring for DEI-related roles. So 2 years out, though, what's changed? And Bo, I'd like to start with you on that question.
Sure. So in terms of what has changed, I wish I could say a whole heck of a lot, but unfortunately the answer is much more complex than that. I think 2020 was a reckoning year, and 2020 was a wake-up year for corporations realizing they could no longer stay silent, especially the ones that were silent at the time. And you're right, a lot of bold statements were made, a lot of bold commitments were made, and 2 years out, you're starting to see which company, where the commitments were real, and where they aren't. And I have the fortune of mentoring lots of young, aspiring DEI professionals. And I recall over the 2 year, like the year after George Floyd's lynching and murder, a lot of them would come to me, they're like, oh, I got reached out by this company, and here's what they're promising me, or here's what they're doing. And I was like, don't take that job. That is not, there are so many red flags you just told me, but the promise was too much. And now those same people that I mentor are coming back going, Bo, should I quit? Should I quit? And I'm like, yep, you quit. Because I told you 2 years ago, red flags, you're seeing them now, and what were those red flags? One, where they were reporting to in the organization. They were like very much like middle to upper middle management. The companies refused to make any commitments about resources. They refused to talk about headcount. And most importantly, I tell every single one of my mentees, I said, when you're interviewing for a senior job, you have to talk to the CEO. You have to interview as part of your job. And you go and ask them, if they don't offer you the CEO, you go and ask them to meet with the CEO. If they refuse, you don't take the job. Because that means that this is not coming from the CEO. And so what has changed? I think in the companies that were pretty much committed before the murder of George Floyd, they have just accelerated. And there's what's happening, like the rest of the world, where everything's being polarized and bifurcated. You're seeing a certain subset of companies like running really hard and fast and making progress, but the companies that weren't really activated before, they're lagging behind further and further.
And Teresita, I think you'd also shared some interesting statistics when we were talking earlier around some of the changes. Would you like to share a little more about that?
Yeah, one of the things that we were talking about was the fact that in this work, you have to figure out how you sustain. And we were looking at the tenure of chief diversity officers, and I was sharing about an article that I had just recently read that said that the average tenure of the chief diversity officer was now under 2 years. It was actually 1.8 years. And what was underlying that, hence our conversation today, was literally burnout, exhaustion, anxiety, depression, deep fatigue, like bone-weary fatigue, and the long-term traumatic effects of that, and people saying, I can't do it anymore, and opting out.
And that's going on against that national backdrop, but also there's the personal impact. And so I'd like to ask you, Patty, actually, what was the most challenging moment that you've experienced in your work in the last 2 years, and what did that look like, and how are you getting out of it or got out of it?
I quit my job.
I actually quit my job. I took a month off and really evaluated this work and the impact it was having on me as an individual that is part of all these communities, the intersectionality. You know, folks, I was willing to do whatever it took. Now, I understand that that's a luxury, right? Not everybody can just leave their jobs. I have an amazing wife and a tremendous family and friends who I knew I wasn't going to be homeless or anything like that, right? So, but I will tell you, it was a moment in time where I slowed down. I literally did nothing for like a month, as people, like was Bo was saying, like pounding on my door to entertain the idea of coming to work for them. At one point I had a list, I had 24 organizations. And when I finally realized I should probably get a job, I decided to reach out to a few of those folks, and to your point, I also asked, what's your budget? Because I think budgets are moral documents around this work, right? So similar to the CEO, like if they're putting money behind it, right? And so I chose to join Riot. Been there 7 months, probably the best 7 months in my career thus far, over 20 years, because they're the real deal. Yeah.
Excellent. So I'd like to also ask that of the rest of the panel, if anybody has anything else you'd be willing to share there. These last 2 years, and especially, I think, Rowdy, you were moving into this space. What was that like for you?
Yeah, so unlike my esteemed panelists, pretty new to DEI, and being frank and honest with everyone in the room, I spent a moment with Isabel and I asked her, did you mean to choose me for this panel?
Yes.
Do I have a space here? And I kid you not, I waited until the day after they asked for us to confirm our participation to say, yes, I will. And I thought about it every day up until that day. And thank you, I can be more proud. I couldn't be more nervously excited to be here alongside each one of you in this entirely new role, doing powerful work for me personally as a queer brown man, and for the constituents that we are serving at Experian in promoting and advancing our mission of financial power to all. But that being said, that was my boss. Yes. I think one of the most challenging moments for me, as someone who lived alone, who's someone that was quite afraid and still carries fear about COVID, getting sick, and the what ifs, was channeling all of the emotion in the everyday that was happening to us, for us, to our people, to our family. I didn't know what to do with that emotion. And I then one day thought about those people that matter to me most, which so happen to be my nieces and nephews, because they accept all of their Theo Rowdy, all of their Uncle Rowdy, regardless of who he is and who he isn't. And they're black and they're brown and they're Asian. And I broke down, and at that moment, I knew that I needed to do something, and I used them as inspiration to pour myself into my work, do everything and anything I could. I get that there's an element of work-life balance and maybe being unhealthy, but I used that passion to fuel the work that I get to do today. And it has done things for me personally and professionally, some of which I hope to share in just a moment, such as being that small town kid with big city dreams, sitting alongside each of you, sharing my story and hopefully inspiring the next DEI great leader seated in these very chairs.
If I can build on something that both of them have been saying, so I think much like Patty, I've been working in D&I for over 2 decades, and I think that is actually a privilege that allows us to do our job a little bit differently because one, like we've seen everything. We've literally probably seen everything. We know all the dead bodies are, everything like, and two, it gives us a confidence to know that we know our shit, and like so that we can walk away from our job if we needed to, if something was pushing on it. For me personally, so I've really seen everything, and the statistics you share about like the 1.8 years, the average tenure. So I was a chief diversity officer in Marsh & McLennan Companies. I was there for almost 5.5 years, and I've been at Uber for 4.5 years, so I've blown that number out of the water. But 2020 was probably the singular most difficult year of my 20-some-odd year career. And it was the combination of like what Rowdy was talking about, family, and then everything else. So 2020, obviously the world fell apart in multiple different ways. I have 2 children. At the time, my children were 2 and 8. And I have wonderful childcare most of the time, but during the early days of COVID, we know it wasn't safe for a nanny to come in, so I was without our nanny for about 2.5 months. I was trying to, Uber's stock fell from somewhere in the high 40s down to $13. We ended up going through a round of layoffs. We cut about 20% of our workforce at that time. That was incredibly difficult for the entire organization. And the D&I, we play a lot of roles, but one of the roles that we play that's not directly related to the topics of diversity, equity, inclusion is you become the company's therapist. When the company is in pain for any emotional reason, you absorb that. They come to you for comfort, for clarity, for answer. So my team was dealing with that, and I had to also cut about 20% of my team. And like you all know, like DEI folks, we're family. Like we go through so much, like we care about each other. So then that happened, and I literally had to cut 20% of my team the week before George Floyd. Like, I cut my team, George Floyd happened on Monday. And suddenly, the entire world was going, and now you solve all of our problems. Right. So I'm like on this diminished team. My team was dealing with, survival guilt. We're trying to answer all these questions. And then, I think the thing that was hardest for me, I had one of our dearest colleagues, Monica Parham. She ended up passing away from uterine cancer in October of 2020. And I ended up having my first panic attack 24 hours after she passed away. Full-blown just panic attack. And it was just like overwhelming, and it's scary because anyone who's ever had a panic attack, they're frightening as hell. I continued to have panic attacks, but I wasn't seeking help. Because I had to show up every single day for the company. I was showing up. And then the thing that, and my dad, by the way, was also passing away from pancreatic cancer this entire time. So no child care, companies like in flames. My team is absorbing all this emotional energy. We lost a dear friend of ours. My dad's passing away. And I was on the streets of New York City right after Thanksgiving, and I fainted right on the streets of New York City. And the next thing I remember waking up, face is like in fire because I literally face planted into the floor. I'm looking up, people are staring at me. And I'm like, oh, I'm okay. Clearly not okay. Clearly not okay. Yeah. Luckily, I was pretty close to home, called my husband. He came and picked me up, ended up going to the doctor, ended up having diagnosed with all these stress-related issues, hypertension for the very first time in my life, all these things. Finally took my health seriously, and my team members don't know this except for maybe one or two who I'm very close with. I nearly quit my job. Like, Patty, quit your job. I probably should have quit my job to take care of myself. But the one thing that kept me from quitting my job was actually Uber. Was actually the commitment I made to my team and to the company to make progress. And I knew that I wasn't going to be able to find a job as good as the one I had if I did quit. And I would regret walking away when I didn't feel like the commitment I made to the company. So I talked to my boss. I said, I need to change some things around. I can't do this anymore the way I've been doing it. And she was fantastic. And I'm here, but I think I'm a really good example. Like, even the most resilient of us, like, I've always thought of myself as being hyper resilient. I've been doing this work for like 2 decades, right? I've seen everything. But like, all of us will hit a burning point. And hopefully that burning point will be before you faint on the streets of New York City. God help you, please. Like, you shouldn't wait until a panic attack. You shouldn't wait, yeah.
Can I layer onto that?
Absolutely.
Okay. I know we have other questions.
No, this is.
But here's the other thing that comes into that. Many of us in this work are living in bodies and experiencing the world through marginalization as well. And we don't give ourselves the space to recover, to heal as we're doing the work. And then we're holding, similar to the therapy, being the therapist, I've had leaders tell me, you are the conscious of the company. And I'm reminded, if you know me, if you spend any time with me at all, you'll know that I love quotes. Toni Morrison has this quote, if you want to fly, you got to give up that shit that weighs you down. And holding on to the fact that you are the conscious of a company, you got to let that go. You got to let it go. And you've also got to give yourself the space to actually be able to heal and recover, because we are living through and dealing with trauma. And I have a very similar story. Like, as I hear you tell your story, I remember when George Floyd's murder was being streamed, seeing come across my phone, I Can't Breathe. And it flashed me back to 5 years earlier when I was holding my little baby son, who was just months old. The headline, same headline, I Can't Breathe. And it was in that moment that I literally could not breathe, because I had not watched The Thing yet, but I was like, please God, not again. Not again. This can't be happening again. And the very next day, I immediately went into triage mode for my company and did not take any of the moments to process for myself, to heal for myself, to work through it for myself. And so that anxiety, that deep pain, the trauma, the wounds being ripped back open just continued to fester, because I was just working, like, I'm gonna solve this for the company. On a skeleton crew, right? I was in retail at the time, in the midst of the pandemic, not a fun place to be, on a skeleton crew, right? And so the notion of that we have to take care of ourselves before we get to complete burnout, because if we are burned down to the ground and we are now ashes and dust, what good is that? Absolutely. Right? We are needed, so we gotta care for ourselves.
We got to care for ourselves. And I want to pause here and talk a little bit about burnout. And just to kind of set the stage here for us, let me hook you up with a definition. So the Mayo Clinic refers to burnout as a special type of work-related stress, a state of physical or emotional exhaustion, but also maybe a sense of reduced accomplishment, a loss of personal identity. And it can look different than just being overworked, right? Burnout can look like fatigue, but it can also look like apathy or dissatisfaction or catastrophizing, right? So we're talking about burnout now and your experiences, but what antidotes have you found to burnout in your work?
I can go.
Yeah.
So I think the Riot folks know I'm a good time. I like to have a lot of fun.
Find her at Gala.
Yeah, and I think, so that's really important, right? I think in ensuring that you surround yourselves, like the kind of weighing down, that's related to people too. If you're like me, culturally, I was raised to help other people, like always help people in need. My mom used to say, never have less than $20 in your pocket because you never know who's gonna need it, right? So I was taught to always put other people first, right? And so it took a long time for me to dismantle that and go, well, I need to take care of me too. So we were talking about being in Vegas, and I know some of y'all went to some shows while you're here. I went to a show by myself last night. It was super fun, right? So I carve out time to have a lot of fun, and that could be watching a movie or going to a show, whatever. I will also say that there's not a concept, but there's this, we're in this grind culture. And I was also sharing with our folks last night that this woman created something called the nap ministry.
Yes.
Right?
Follow her on Instagram.
Follow her. Yeah. And she's like, I don't have meetings over 30 minutes because if you can't get it done in 30 minutes, it's not worth my time. But she carves out time to sleep, right? How many of you in this room get 8 hours of sleep?
Last night?
Well, not last night. I saw you at the pool party,
Yep.
dancing the Hannah Rad.
Pool party and others?
So look at that though. Hardly anybody raised their hand. And we know that is a fundamental way of living, right?
Yeah.
And the nap ministry, she talked about even when Harriet Tubman was freeing the slaves, dogs were chasing them, she stopped to pray. She took a moment. So if she can take a moment, we can take a moment, right? So find out what you love to do outside of work. Like, I love my job, I really do. But I also carve out time. How many times do we tell people we're too busy? To me, no, just make the time for those things, right? So that's how I deal with it, but I can also feel it coming on.
Yeah.
And when I feel it coming on, I stop, right?
Yeah.
And I have a great team though, too, right? So I know the building's not gonna burn down, nothing like that. So I encourage you all to find the thing you love to do and do it. Make the time for it and don't say you're too busy.
I like that. Hardy?
Yeah, I'd like to add two things, both of which are quite simple and simplistic, I'd say. One of them, earlier on you heard me say, I poured myself into the work and I continue to do that as I continue to be energized. But let's be realistic, I'm not going to solve the problem alone, and we need help. I need help. And so the first thing is we need to ask for help. And I have found that the more that I put myself out there and I'm sharing with others what I'm doing, there is an enormous amount of energy in our organizations of people who want to help, many of which don't know how. And so you ask for help, but you tell them what you want them to do. So that's the first thing. And then the second thing, as someone who likes to feel all the feels, if you will, and isn't embarrassed or ashamed to share the feeling, is authentic leadership. Emoting and sharing with others and carving out space for yourself in the workplace and for others to be their true authentic selves. We're working from home, we're living at work, if you will. Children are coming in, we're falling apart, we live alone. Everything that's happening is creating an environment in which there's an influx of emotion. And I've found that in connecting with others and sharing with them how I'm feeling, they do the same, and it creates I don't know scientifically what happens within our bodies, but it's that warm, fuzzy feeling that happens around me that gets me through yet another day to do the work that we're all here to do together.
And I'm going to jump in here. So first and foremost, get yourself to a therapist. If you are a D&I practitioner, and even if you're not, like, your title isn't D&I practitioner, let's say you're adjacent, you do ERG work, you should all be seeing therapists. I have been seeing a therapist ongoing for 5+ years now after, the birth of my second child. It is so valuable because think about what a therapist is, or a psychiatrist or a psychologist, whatever you want to call it. There's somebody you pay who is forced to listen to you complain for 45 minutes. And they have to listen to you because you're paying them to do that, right? Like, don't use your friends. Pay someone to listen, and then and maybe if they're a good therapist, they'll actually like be able to listen and then like help you actually work through your problems. So first of all, get yourself a therapist. That is one of the most important. And you know what? Get yourself on the meds too, if that's what you need. I've been on, Zoloft for like 5 years.
Shout out SSRIs. Yeah.
I love them. They're not good for everybody, but like for those for whom it works, fantastic. Yeah. So that's one thing I would definitely say. And then I learned a really cool trick during COVID. So we're working from home, right? And when you have those 15-minute breaks, it's too long to like really get any work done, but it's like long enough that you can go and get lost in your emails, right? Yeah. We all have that. So someone said to me once, they were like, rather than going and checking your email and driving you crazy, can you take those 15 minutes and go lay on the floor? And if you have bolsters, I'm a yogi, so I have like all the things in my home. They're like, go and put yourself in a restorative yoga position, and for like 10, 15 minutes, just let your body completely relax. And like just start focusing on your breath. That has been one of the most transformative things that I started doing during work from home. That's why I will never work from an office full-time ever again, because I am not giving up my 15-minute restorative yoga poses. So y'all, like, go out, buy some bolsters, buy some blocks. You got 15 minutes. Do not check your email. Just lay in a pose.
Yeah. Can I just say, I love that, because in my house we do dance breaks. We're like, Alexa, play Cuff It. And we stop everything and we just dance our hearts out.
I'm down for the dance breaks. Yes. Right? You can schedule them. The other thing that I would say, like speaking about rest, think about rest as an actual piece of your work. So you schedule it and you protect it the same way that you would any other meeting. And in terms of the rest piece, there are some amazing resources. We mentioned Nap Ministry. Yes. There's another woman, Octavia Rahim. She has this amazing book, Pause, Rest, Be, Stillness Practices for Times of Courageous Change. And it has literally changed my life around how I think about rest, restoration, its criticality to actually being able to sustain, not only in the work, but in the life that I want to have and who I want to be as a human. I think that piece is so important. Last thought that I have for you is on therapists. I also have a therapist, and I think it's critical. 2 thoughts I have for you. One is that when you're looking for that person, be selfish and tenacious about finding the person that's the right fit for you. For me, it was important that I had a Black woman, and I was able to find a queer Black woman therapist that I felt safe with. And she didn't take any of my BS. So she was actually very used to working with people that were social workers or also other therapists or in other backgrounds. So she did not take any of it. And she was actually helped me to figure out that I was making my work my identity. And so when there were failures or pieces where I couldn't get something through that I wanted to get through at work, it became an identity failure for me. And I had to unpack that thing, but I could not have unpacked it without having the right person. And I also recognize that that is a privilege to be able to have a therapist. And so there are a lot of avenues now. Thankfully, we live in a season that there are a lot of different avenues where you can actually access that type of support, whether it is virtual or it is a more traditional mode. But I think don't shortchange yourself. Be selfish. Yeah. Be selfish.
# fire your therapist. Fire them if they don't work.
Yes. I want to stay on this point. Actually, we're at the half-hour mark, so I do want to remind folks in the audience, I'm not going to talk for too much longer. I want to turn it over and have questions from you all as well as our virtual, so start getting them ready. But I want to pause on burnout and this idea of therapy, because we were also talking earlier about the DEI practitioners as everyone's therapist in the workplace as well. So how do you deal with that, and how do you set some boundaries in your work so that you don't become everyone's therapist or
Let it
moral
go.
consciousness? Yeah.
I let it go. And I have to continually remind myself that that's not my role to be everyone's therapist.
Right, right. And I'd say, like, listening is a really hard skill to get really good at. You don't have to have the answers, right? And listening, I like to use kind of appreciative inquiry all the time. Tell me more, help me understand. That's just really to get folks to talk a little bit more, because sometimes I think that's what they want, right? And so I have to keep telling myself, don't try to solve for them. Because I get into that mode of, let me help you again, let me help solve this, maybe talk to this person, but when you think about it and how much time it takes, I have employees reaching out to me about all kinds of stuff. Some of it is humorous, some of it is sad, some of it makes me very angry, but I have to say no a lot and let it go, because it will consume me. Why? Because I feel like I'm an empathetic person and I care about humans, right? So, but I have to put myself first. That's the theme for me, put myself first.
I think that word no is so powerful because like we get people reaching out to us with all sorts of reasons, and because they assume that we're very empathetic, and generally speaking, they're right. But I think what surprises people a lot is, for example, I'll give you an example. Somebody reaches out to me, they're like, I'm being bullied by my manager, they don't like me, I think it's because of this, that, and the other. And so I'm like, okay, let's talk about it. I want to know if there's really like discrimination or bias or something like that. And then I hear them talking, and it's like very clear that the reason why they reached out to me is because they got some legitimate objective performance feedback that they didn't agree with.
Right.
And it kind of sounds like they are not doing their job. And then I'll look at them and I'm like, can I be honest with you? It sounds like you're not doing your job. I suggest you go back and do your job. And if this behavior continues, 100% come back and talk to me. Right? And I think people are surprised. And like, that's how you don't internalize this stuff. Like, when you have to say, I disagree with you, you should say that. Just because being empathetic doesn't mean that you're always having to like be like, agree with them that they're the victim.
Right.
Yeah.
We're at work, people. We are at work, right?
Yeah.
That's the last. At work, right?
I'm also thinking of something that you told me, Patty, about who owns the work as well, right? Because we turn to diversity, equity, and inclusion, like fix it, fix everything.
Fix it.
Yeah.
No. Everyone owns the work, right? But I think what happens is sometimes we peanut butter spread it, and we don't meet people where they are, right? So a big kind of strategy for me is, the folks that are banging on your door wanting to do this work. And this is, honestly, this is a plug for Riot, but it's the honest truth, that this is the first place I've ever been where people want to do this work, and they're asking how to do it. I have yet to walk in a room and share the business imperative of why diversity and inclusion is important. I've had to do that everywhere else. So then I know, okay, I can grab onto that and use it to my advantage, right? So as practitioners, we have to know really where people are. One person told me, Roz Hudnell, who used to run diversity at Intel, said, if people don't live diverse lives, it's going to be really hard for them. And so for me, I want to help them get there, right? Especially if they're C-suite level, executive level. But I also have to, at every meeting, I'm going to say, here are the things I need you to do, right? Every meeting we have, there's action items. We're about to roll this out very quickly here at Riot around like, and then those things will be different depending on where people are in the organization, right? So I would advise that, what do you want your executives to do? What do you want your middle managers to do, right? Because what do we always say? It's the middle.
Yeah.
So create a strategy for the middle, right? Don't just keep saying that. Help them, right? and then create something where you can measure the results. That's another big thing in this space, is you create goals, you've determined how you're gonna do it, but how are you measuring success? We all know it's the right thing to do. We always say that. I don't like that, by the way. But measure success, because guess what? You can go back and say, this is what we did, this is how we did it, and these were the results.
Can I build on that? Because I think that topic of ownership and like, it's so important. So there are two principles of DEI that I always teach my teams. One, the reason the work is hard is because we own almost nothing, but we influence everything, everything. So that's one principle, and you should internalize that. Second principle is your pace of progress will go as fast as the person who is most resistant.
Say that again.
Your pace of progress will go as fast as the person who is most resistant. Right. So people are looking at us going, fix it. And you're like, I own nothing. You want me to fix it? Give it to me. I will fix it if you give it to me. Otherwise, blame him or her or them, right? But this is really important. It's like people, like most of us, all of us on this stage are all people of color. Most of us on this stage are part of the LGBTQ community. Like some of us have disabilities. Some of us came from really impoverished backgrounds. We didn't create any of the problems. But then they look at people of color, they look at queer people, they look at people with disabilities, go, now you have to solve the problems that these folks in power have created. Yeah. And I am like, All I do is I give you the solution, but you're the owners of the solution. And I will, and that's the big thing. Dara, my CEO, I was presenting to the board for the very first time, and this is how he introduced me. He said, this is Bo, she's our Chief Diversity Officer. The thing you need to know about Bo is that Bo will tell you what to do. And if you don't listen to her, she will tell you again, and again, and again, until you do it. And the thing that I've learned is that Bo is always right. And so the best thing to do is just to do it the first time she says it, so she doesn't have to repeat herself, because she gets less nice every time she repeats herself. And so every time my leaders try to tell me I have to fix the problem, or it's my problem, or blah, I'm like, nope, your problem. But my team can help you find the solution.
Like that.
Yep.
Thank you. All right.
Bo's a gangster.
That's what 20 years gives you. 20 years gives you that privilege.
I got to get some of that.
So the actual conversation. So I'm starting to see questions coming in. So I want to ask my last question now. And I'd actually like to start with you, Roddy, as more recently joining this field. So what advice do you have for new practitioners that are entering into the diversity, equity, and inclusion space?
So in true business school form, I have 3 things to leave you with.
All right.
The first one is that I believe there's a new coming out, and that new coming out is stepping in. And in stepping in, I think every one of us, in order to be our best selves any day, every day, at home, at work, wherever you are, we need to embrace our full identity, everything that we are, and lean into that. My queerness, my brownness, I've learned in this role, which is such a privilege to have, that those are the things that make me unstoppable. The second thing, we need to get out of our own way. It's taken me almost 40 years. I'm 3 weeks away from 40. 40 years to learn that I am not less than. I'm not less than. We are not less than because we're brown, because we're gay, because we are who we are. And we need to turn the voices off. We have control over that. Or we can seek help to get those voices to stop so that they lift us up and propel us forward. And I will read this straight from my notes, and unapologetically so. We need to speak up when our voice is shaking.
So proud.
That was really good. So other advice for new practitioners?
Get yourself a bow.
Get yourself a bow.
But seriously though, like you need to find community because we cannot do this work alone. And it's really important that we are connecting because when you are on that edge and you've had that conversation and you're like, what just happened? You need to talk to someone who can like talk you off the ledge and like help you understand and help you strategize where you're gonna go. I have someone on my team, I'm looking at him now, and he will say like, what's the outcome that we're trying to get to?
That's right, yeah.
What's the outcome that we're trying to get to? And then if I'm going, he'll pause and then go again. And when I get that again, I know I didn't get it. Again, what's the outcome that we're trying to get to? Because we can like get caught up in like the short-term, quick wins, the quick activity, the quick events, but we're missing getting to the bigger outcome. And so I think having community around you that's been there, that's been through it, been through some things, can help you think through that, can bring different perspectives and lenses to it, is so important to be able to sustain.
Right.
And I think that community, one of the things that I feel a little sad about as D&I has grown, so when Patty and I started, D&I wasn't a thing. There weren't chief diversity officers. There wasn't like staffs of people doing this. And so all of us in this work, we basically all knew each other because we had to know each other. We had to support each other. The community was strong, and there are many women, mostly women, but there are many women who have been doing this work for 20 years, and we all still know each other, and we all still rely on each other. But this next generation, because there's so many and it's so diffuse, that sense of community I feel like is not quite there. That's why it's so important to create it. I would also say, just one other thing I would add for new practitioners. So the Honorable John Lewis, oh my God, he talks a lot about getting into good trouble, right? And I have sort of an equivalency. I said, do your job in such a way that you can get good fired. I do my job, and trust me, even though right now I have an immense amount of financial privilege, I was a Pell Grant recipient. I didn't get health insurance until I was 22 years old and got my first real job. I was like poor. I love school lunch, free school lunch. Oh man, that stuff is delicious. So I grew up super poor, so I have this constant like trauma of like losing it all very quickly. Mm-hmm. But I learned I had to get over that because I had to do my job in such a way that if I spoke the truth of what needed to get done, I might get fired, and I have to be okay with getting fired. So like, do your job in a way that you could potentially get good fired. And I know that's really hard to hear, but that's what you have to do. Yeah.
I think for me, listen, we're at Out and Equal. I find partners that can help with this work. So the lift is not all on us as a team. I also think that that's why the budgets are important, right? So you can partner with organizations. I think also, we always say this, we want to work ourselves out of a job.
Yeah.
Right, we do. But I think, that's not going to happen, right? But I think, but I think that's kind of what drives me, right, to do the work. And I think, to your point about it being in a place of privilege, let's all use that to help others. I think there's been a lot of performative hiring of diversity folks at companies. Remember my list of 24? Mm-hmm. But let's tap those people and go, listen, this might have been a mistake. Let's talk about it. To the community, I miss that too. Because this is the one thing about business. Diversity folks, we share. Because we all want to thrive together. Got it, I got my little value on my sleeve. Thrive together, I wove that in. But you know, it's serious that we share. We don't have secrets, right? Because our goal is for everyone to really excel at this work. So in this room today, meet each other, use your QR code, connect with people. Let's create that community, right? let's help those folks that were taking jobs and all of a sudden got in there and was like, wait a minute, this is miserable. Let's get them out, right? So let's build that community again and use partners.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much. I'm going to start with one question from our virtual audience, and then I think we have, I got them straight on my phone, yeah. And then we've got microphones ready for folks, so we'll start over here in person when we're ready. We have somebody to bring a mic over here. Okay, so this is, actually, I really like this question. I want to know the answer too. What tips do you all have for advocating for our time when it's been a little bit normalized to just bulldoze through the blocks of time? I think we've all tried these moments of working block, email block, summit prep block, right? And people just kind of bulldoze straight through those. What strategies do you have for protecting your time?
Hold people accountable, right? People use these words like your mental health is really important, right? Hold them accountable for that. But I do this all the time. I block 12 to 1 like for lunch every day, and someone goes, can you just squeeze it in? And I'm like, okay, I have to stop doing that. So I think the accountability to yourself and with others when they say, yes, it's okay, is it really okay, right? Ask those questions, because I think everyone thinks their problem is a fire drill, but ask, is it really, right? Or tips like, can we wait till tomorrow? Can this wait until when I have time at 3 o'clock this afternoon? I'm very clear with people when I'm available, and then I make that time. So that's just a quick one.
Unshare your calendar. Don't let people see it. No, seriously. Like most of you work for companies probably on like a Google Calendar or something like that. Like just take away everybody's access to your calendar so that all they can see is that your time is blocked, but they can't see what it's blocked for, right? And so that people have to actually come to you to schedule time on your calendar. They can't just put it on your calendar. And when they say, you're like, I'm so sorry, I'm working on a really serious presentation. I totally have blocked time for yoga and been like, I have a really important meeting with Dara. Sorry.
I have to admit that I'm having a reaction to that, because I'll get stressed out when I don't see the details on somebody's blocked calendar, but there's a reason.
That's your problem.
That's
not
my
mine.
problem, exactly. And you know what? That little alert that we get every week, it's been telling me that it's like you need to stop scheduling things with people the same day. So I will take accountability for that. I apologize. I recognize that. But that is a really good point, because then you're forced to go ask somebody what they're doing at that time. Yeah.
I think coming up with ways to say no is really important. I'm my own worst enemy in this sense. I do block the time, but then I give it all away.
Yep.
But but I'm the one who's actually the problem with that. The other thing my therapist told me is that disappointment is a part of life. People will be disappointed. It's okay.
So I have a really good saying, and I actually learned it from my husband. He says, really successful people say no more than they say yes. Really, really successful people say, totally screwed that up. Really successful people say yes more than they say no. Really, really successful people say no more than they say yes. And that's true, 100%.
I'd add 2 things.
Yes.
They'll sound like jokes, but they're really not. Schedule hair appointments during the day. You can't have hair like this if you don't go to the barber. And I won't speak to anyone if I'm in the chair. And then secondly, and I'm not kidding you, my boss knows that I'm probably sitting in a movie theater by 2 p.m. every Friday, and he will text and say, I hope you're enjoying your movie. My phone is on silent. I'm not replying.
I love that. That's great. And then we had a question
That's
over
that
here.
fun thing I said. Make time for the fun stuff.
Yeah.
Hi, everyone. My name is Chris Budin. My pronouns are he, him, his, and I really wanted to thank you for speaking so authentically today and honest and open. I'm not a D&I professional, although I hope to be someday. I am an ERG lead for our company, Mondelez International. I've been doing it for the last 3 years. I'm probably soon to retire out of it, because we're only supposed to do it for 2. And I'm also a proud trans folk, and I'm honored to be a visible voice for the younger generation, looking to have us available as leaders in this space. And I'm having a hard time balancing my professional and my volunteer life with the urgency of trans advocacy and also LGBTQ+ and social justice and all of everything together, knowing that also as a veteran, like the suicide rates for veterans are staggeringly high. So I can work with the VA, potentially, and advocate on behalf of trans folks. And then the suicide rate for trans kids. Just in New Jersey in the last year, 2 12-year-olds have committed suicide. So, like, from my perspective, the urgency is to not stop, to continue to speak out, and to not put myself first, because I do care about people. So this is the question.
Love it.
I'm not in HR, I'm not in any sort of like business school or anything like that, but as an ERG lead, is there a way for us leaders to like make the jump over to being in the D&I space? Do your companies have options like that?
So I want you, okay, Alex, please raise your hand. And Indy, please raise your hand. And Belinda, please raise your hand. I want you to find these 3 people afterward, and I want you to talk about how they made that jump. Alex jumped from being an ERG leader, Indy jumped from being an ERG leader, and Belinda jumped from being my EA. So,
Are
to
there
them.
other folks in the room who've made that jump? Could you
Yeah.
raise your hands?
Let's go. Dan, Bridget, Patrick. Yeah.
James, you
can-
see,
the
these
Riot
are your
folks.
people.
Yeah, the Riot folks too. But I just want to say one thing. I know you really want to do those things and help. If you don't take care of yourself, you're not going to be able to do that, right? Just take a moment, because this is your posse right here. We got you. So, and please just don't feel like you have to boil the ocean. That's a trap. It will really burn you out very quickly.
If I were to lay one more thing, you are a DEI practitioner. You're doing it from a different seat.
Yeah, you're right.
We have our microphones. CV, did you? Right here. Excellent. And then we'll come over here.
Okay. First off, thanks for having this session, Isabel. This is great. And as someone who's been doing DEI for almost a decade and has CDO on the bucket list, Patty, you hit on this topic earlier, the middle. I'm curious, aside from comp, what are your strategies for really getting it driving DEI in the middle? I talked to a number of folks who have it at the top. They get it. It's not window dressing. They're driving it down. The younger generations are bringing it up. But what are some of those real great techniques to really hit home in the middle?
Right, so you just kind of nailed it. The middle is getting pressure from the top and the bottom. So leading with this empathy and really kind of creating the space where it's like identifying where they are in this whole diversity kind of spectrum of stuff, right? And then I think for me, this is gonna sound a little bit kind of cheesy, but I am always clear and I let them know that I got you, right? And kind of like almost like building a friendship, a relationship deep in that. Because who am I to go and ask you to do something when I don't even know you, right? So I have to get to know people, and that might mean spending time having a coffee or lunch or something like that, because the more I get to know someone, I know where they're at, and then I can then meet them where they are, right? I use that a lot, but it's a practice, right? And the listening. And also, like, you know what, the pressure coming from the top and the bottom, it's like, okay, maybe name some little wins that can happen immediately. DEI folks, we get wins every day, and I think we miss that. We're always trying to solve for these big things, but keep in mind of these little wins all the time. So I would say in the middle, get to know those folks. I actually carved out like an org chart on our team where we actually designate people to work with those folks in the middle, right? So they're not always coming to me. We have designated people to be their liaisons. Why? Because they know they're supported. Because it's lonely in the middle, right? You're getting a lot of pressure. So that's the thing that I would suggest that you do.
Thank you. I want to go to a virtual question, and then where are our microphones? Because that really determines. All right, and then I think we'll go in these sides, and then we'll come up front here with Amy. But one of the questions that came in, I think is sort of a companion to this, from the ERG leaders side, especially for ERG leaders who are volunteering, who are spread thin, what are some of the strategies? What can they do to better support DEI?
I know, we're ready.
Yeah.
We're ready. I think you have to focus your efforts. You can't do everything. And so being able to say, like, what's the most important thing that I can go after? And then what's our overarching strategy for what we're trying to drive so that we join forces? And then we become force multipliers together. That piece is really important. I think going back to the whole point of this conversation from a resilience perspective is we can't do all the things. And so, like, how do we think about, like, being very focused and strategic about the things that we will put our hands to?
I like to think of my ERG leaders and boards as like inside agents.
Yes.
We can't, the DEI team, as much as we carve out that time, we get to know people, we can't be connected into the day-to-day weeds all the time. And so I make sure that I'm meeting with our ERG leaders, and I know that my leads are doing the same thing, because like you're the ones who are going to tell us that sucks. This policy sucks. It's having a horrible, like we've all been going to the return to office work, and like our parents' ERG has been fantastic at telling us this does not work for us. This return to office does not work for us. So like y'all are our inside agents, and like use us that way. Tell us what's going on.
The other thing that I'd add, aside from being aligned and understanding the DEI strategy and then amplifying that strategy, as you said, Teresita, is as people of color, as queer people, whatever the ERG represents, help the business think about what the consumer need is as you represent that segment. So help further the business along in how they're thinking about going to market with marketing, new products and services as well. It's not only internally what we can do together with respect to talent, development, and culture, but then what we can do to help the business, sustain the business and grow the business, and informing things of that nature as well.
So this might be a little unpopular, and I'm still learning. I think this idea of the platinum rule, like we call them RIGs, right, inclusion groups, treat them the way they want to be treated. I learned that sometimes they just want to be social and network, and as the person in this seat, I feel like I need to be okay with that. But what am I doing? I go to an event and I'm like, there's no signs. How do we know what we're doing? Yada, yada. But I'm like, just let them do what they want to do, right? I mean, within certain parameters, but I feel like over the years that I've been doing this work, I've been trying to force them to make a business impact and not thinking about, do they even want to do that, right? So I had to really step back and evaluate what the RIGs wanted to do and the ERGs wanted to do, and think about, okay, well, if that's what they want to do, I need to be comfortable with that. Forcing them to try to do something that they're not passionate about or they don't have any energy around, it's not going to work.
All right, final question.
I feel so privileged.
No pressure.
Privileged getting the final question. I'll come over here so people can see me. So I'm Amy Hanneman. I'm the Chief Diversity Officer of Northwestern Mutual. So I'm in this choir, y'all. This has been so great. Has this not been so great? My pronouns are she, her. So this is tongue in cheek. Remember, I'm a member of the choir here. I've been doing this for 20 years. But if this work sucks so bad, why do we keep doing it? And I want to know, what is your why? And it kind of goes back to what we were talking about with our people here, like how to be resilient and what do you tell people who are newer to this work. But if this work is so hard, why do we stay in it? I'd love to know that inspiration.
Folks know this about me. I literally believe I am helping to change the world.
So I tell people that on my great tombstone, all I want written on it is, she left things a little bit better.
Yeah.
That's it.
I do this work for the future generations. I've tried to get away from it for years, and I always come back to it. Like always, I always find my way back. And it's because I wanna experience, and I want others to have expansive humanity, expansive possibility, and expansive liberation. And so while it's hard, it's worth it.
I don't want the small town kid that I talked about, that I know myself to be, to ever look back and think, what if? And that's why I do what I do every single day.
I'm a professional, Patty. We got this on time. All right, with that, thank you all so much for joining. A special thank you to those of you who are joining us virtually as well. Special thank you for the team for helping us stream, for those of you who've asked questions in person as well as virtually. And we still have time. There's a break between our sessions. We'll see our panelists also at Gala, so please make sure to connect and join me in thanking everyone with a round of applause. Thank you.